tourism and thank you. Starting from last year to March this year, we see that the epidemic situation has been stabilizing. We have been in active discussion with the Singaporean government on resuming air travel bubble arrangements. I'll now give you a brief report. Over a number of months close discussion between the two governments, we aim to resume cross-border air travel in a gradual and orderly manner. I'm happy to announce that we have reached a consensus. On top of the original arrangements, we have put in place more stringent public health protocols in response to the latest epidemic development. Governments of the two places agree that under the air travel bubble, on the 26th of May, that is a Wednesday, that will be the earliest flight of first designated flights. We will put in place all the measures to make sure that everyone can travel with peace of mind, and we also take into account changing situation. As to whether the scheme can resume as scheduled, it depends on all the measures put in place in the coming 4 weeks. Starting from February and March, we see that the situation in Hong Kong has been stabilizing and the number of cases has been decreasing. We see that there are conditions to relaunch the air travel bubble arrangements. Taking into account the latest situation, say, for example, the emergence of mutated strain and a longer incubation period, we see the need to build in additional safeguards. We take the opportunity to encourage Hong Kong residents to complete 2 doses of vaccination before they travel. Under the new arrangement, we put in place more stringent requirements. There are 4 areas. First, travel history prior to departure. Under the original requirement, travelers should not have been to any places other than Singapore or Hong Kong in the 14 days prior to departure. The additional requirement states that the 14 days does not include quarantine periods in Hong Kong or Singapore arising from the traveller's last visit outside Hong Kong or Singapore. So if you have not left Hong Kong or Singapore in the previous 14 days, then there won't be any problem. However, if they have been to other places before they are in Singapore or Hong Kong and they are required to go through the quarantine period, they will have to complete the quarantine period and then start counting the 14 days. In view of emergent mutated strain and that there are confirmed cases picked up after the 14-day quarantine period, we want to take that into account by putting the new requirement in place to strengthen our protection. The second area is a mechanism to suspend or resume. You may recall that under the original mechanism, there is this arrangement, there is this requirement. In relation to unlinked local cases, the 7-day moving average, if more than 5 cases, then the arrangement will be put on hold for 2 weeks. Subsequently, on the last day of the 2-week suspension period, if the number of cases does not exceed 5, then the scheme will resume. That requirement will still be in place. We take into account the latest situation and the fact that back in November we have encountered some difficulties in relaunching the scheme. We put additional hurdles under the arrangement. On top of the 7-day moving average with less than 5 cases, we will monitor the situation for another 3 consecutive days. And the daily number of these 3 consecutive days of unlinked cases will not exceed 3. And the 7-day moving average on the 3rd day should not exceed 5. In short, we use 5 over the 5 cases of 14 days. Using the 7-day moving average, we add 3 more days. The more stringent requirement is put in place to make sure that the epidemic situation is under a stabilized and downward trend. We want to avoid the stop and start of this air travel bubbles arrangement. The third area is that travelers from Hong Kong to Singapore are required to download, register, and use Singapore's Trace Together mobile application. With the increasing use of Hong Kong's Leave Home Safe mobile app, the additional requirement is that travelers from Singapore to Hong Kong are required to download and use the Leave Home Safe mobile application and keep the records for 31 days after departure. It is a global trend to vaccinate. We have sufficient supply in Hong Kong. We have choices for Hong Kong people to choose from. In order to protect others and themselves, we require travelers joining the air bubble scheme get vaccinated 2 doses and wait for at least 14 days before they can join this scheme. So these are the 4 additional requirements. Original requirements under the scheme in November will be kept. Say, for example, they have to get tested negative and they have to travel on the designated flights. After fulfilling that, they will be free from any restrictions to their itinerary and compulsory quarantine. Well, I want to elaborate that they will have to be tested negative within 72 hours before they travel, and they can only travel on designated flights. We have issued a press release setting out specific requirements of this Hong Kong-Singapore air travel bubble. We will also notify airline companies for them to make arrangements of booking. The relaunching of the air travel bubble will be conducive to the resumption of cross-border air travel. It will also be used as an example for relaunching of travel bubble with other places in a safe manner. In the coming month, we will work with stakeholders as well as the Singaporean government very closely. If there is any rebound of epidemic situation in both places, we will react swiftly. We have made preparations and we ask the public to exercise vigilance to protect themselves and others so that we will be able to restart travel to other places in a gradual and orderly manner, which is conducive to people's livelihood and resumption of businesses.
Mr. Patrick Nip, please. Friends of media and members of the public, today, me and the Commissioner for the Development of the GBA would like to give an account to the public concerning extending the return to Hong Kong travel scheme to a larger scope. The Hong Kong SAR government has implemented this scheme on the 23rd of November last year so that Hong Kong residents in Guangdong province and Macau can return to Hong Kong without being subject to 14-day compulsory quarantine upon fulfillment of certain requirements. The return to Hong Kong scheme is the first step of gradual resumption of travel of people between the 3 places, and it has been operating smoothly. As of yesterday, 135,000 people, all Hong Kong residents, have returned to Hong Kong without being subject to quarantine through the scheme. Overall speaking, the epidemic situation in the mainland has been under control for a certain period of time, and our situation has stabilized gradually. the SAR government decided to extend the Return to Hong Kong travel scheme to Hong Kong residents in other mainland provinces other than Guangdong province and Macau, so that they can return to Hong Kong without being subject to 14-day compulsory quarantine via land-based boundary control points or the Hong Kong International Airport upon fulfillment of specified conditions. The Secretary for Food and Health will specify mainland and Macau as Category 2 specified Chinese places in China under Cap 599C, compulsory quarantine of certain persons arriving at Hong Kong regulation, and also specify conditions that they must not have been to places outside Hong Kong, the mainland or Macau 14 days before arriving at Hong Kong. However, the quarantine period required by local authorities in the mainland and Macau will not be counted, and also they must not have been to places in mainland categorized of having medium or high risk, and also they have to obtain a valid negative nucleic acid test. To allow for gradual return of Hong Kong citizens to Hong Kong without overcrowding the border control points and increase public health risk, we will implement a quota system. For land-based border control points, the existing quotas are not fully utilized, so the number will not change. That is, for the Stringent Bay border control points, the quota is 3,000 per day, and for the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge Hong Kong ports, the number is 2,000 per day. For Hong Kong International Airport, it is newly included in the Return to Hong Kong scheme, and also the quarantine procedures as well as the operational arrangements are more complicated, so we proposed starting from 1,000 quotas per day. Concerning return to Hong Kong via the Hong Kong airport, we have prepared a video clip concerning the procedures of returning to Hong Kong via the Hong Kong International Airport under this scheme. This will help you to understand the procedures, and then I will highlight several points. Currently, for Hong Kong residents to return to Hong Kong via the Hong Kong International Airports, they can be exempted from 14-day quarantine under the Return to Hong Kong scheme. The quota is 1,000 per day. Residents should make a booking on the Return to Hong Kong website, and also there are certain conditions to fulfill. First, they have to be Hong Kong permanent residents. Secondly, 14 days before the arrival at Hong Kong, they must not have been to places other than Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland, or any provinces and places in the mainland regarded as having medium to high risk. Thirdly, after 3 days upon returning to Hong Kong, they have to obtain a negative nucleic acid test from a testing institution recognized by the National Health Commission. And also, upon arrival to Hong Kong, they have to be tested and held in the Hong Kong International Airport. The first step is to apply for a quota to return to Hong Kong at a specified date. The system will show the booking results, and you will receive a SMS notifying you of the results. Please screen cap the confirmation as well as keep the relevant record, because you have to provide the record for immigration purposes. And also, upon 3 days after returning to Hong Kong, you have to get a test at an institution recognized by the NHC. Through the WeChat app, State Council clients, you can inquire of the testing institution to see whether they are recognized by the NHC. Please screen cap the result before boarding the flight in mainland, and also upon returning to Hong Kong, you have to provide the testing.
Remember, when you arrive in Hong Kong, you will have to have your name, the testing organization, date, as well as relevant information verified. You will have to first submit electronic health declaration to fulfill the return to Hong Kong scheme. You will receive a green code. Do remember to download the green code or take a screen cap. It is valid for 48 hours. Failure to fulfill the condition, you'll receive a pink QR code. When you return to Hong Kong, there is a chance that you have to go through compulsory quarantine. Upon leaving the flight, you will have to follow the instructions to go to designated area to get specimen collected. After that, you go to return to Hong Kong scheme counters. Relevant information will be checked by the staff. When you'll be sent electronic health record, you will be asked to wait at the designated holding area to wait for the PCR result. If it is negative, then you will be you'll be informed that you can leave and that you can proceed to the area. For information, please visit returntohongkong.gov.hk or call the hotline.
The video clip has shown the procedures of returning to Hong Kong via HKIA under the scheme. I would like to highlight several points. First of all, for Hong Kong residents who would like to return to Hong Kong from mainland provinces by air, they should first make a booking online through the Return to Hong Kong website. We shall open booking starting 12 a.m. tomorrow, that is the 27th of April, for members of the public to make bookings for returning to Hong Kong between the 29th of April to the 16th of May. And also the port is to be specified. That means that for Hong Kong residents in mainland provinces outside the Guangdong province, they can return to Hong Kong as soon as Thursday, 29th of April, and be exempted from the 14-day compulsory quarantine. The booking system will be open 24 hours a day. At 12 a.m. every Wednesday, booking will be opened for making a booking for returning to Hong Kong in the next 14 days between Monday to Sunday the second week, so that citizens can plan their itinerary accordingly. Secondly, any Hong Kong residents above the age of 18 can make a booking online. To facilitate family members to travel together, every applicant can apply for three other accompany Hong Kong residents, including those under the age of 18 and elderly people. Thirdly, Hong Kong residents who have made a booking have to obtain a negative nucleic acid test result from a testing institution recognized by the National Health Commission 3 days prior to the arrival at Hong Kong, and also obtained the original of the negative test results. Concerning the testing institutions recognized by the NHC, you can find the list under the Institution for Test Enquiry under the State Council clients in the WeChat app. As you saw on the video clip, you should make an inquiry whether the testing agency you are engaging is recognized by the NHC, and also screen cap the search results so that you can show them to the officials in the mainland airports and Hong Kong airports. Fourthly, before boarding a flight, Hong Kong residents should fill in the electronic health declaration form of the Department of Health to specify whether you have obtained a quota under the Return to Hong Kong scheme, whether you have obtained a negative test result, and declare your travel history, as well as generating the green QR code showing that the electronic form has been filled out successfully, and then you can be exempted from the compulsory quarantine upon arrival. If you obtain a pink QR code upon filling out the electronic declaration form, that means that you have not fulfilled all the specified conditions. For example, a quota is not given to you, and you may be subject to a 14-day compulsory quarantine upon arrival. Fifthly, when undergoing immigration procedures in the mainland airport, you have to show the original of the negative test result, the screen cap for the testing institution under the WeChat app, as well as the green QR code generated upon successful electronic health declaration. All Hong Kong residents under the Return to Hong Kong scheme must comply with all the instructions upon arrival as the Hong Kong International Airport. They have to undergo tests and hold at the temporary specimen collection center in the airport, and also wait at the designated waiting zone. If the result is negative, they can proceed with the immigration procedures and be waived the compulsory quarantine requirements, but they have to be tested on the 12th day. For those who chose to return to Hong Kong via land-based BCP, which are citizens who will return to Hong Kong via the Stringent Bay Port or the Hong Kong Zhuhai Macau Bridge Hong Kong ports, they have to make similar preparation. They have to make a booking online and get a quota, and also 3 days prior to the arrival, they have to secure a negative test result. And also before arriving at the Guangdong or Macau port on the appointed date, they have to negative test results via the Yue account code or the Macau health code to the Department of Health's electronic health declaration system and fill out the declaration form. If all conditions are fulfilled, they will get a green QR code, and they can complete the immigration procedures dedicated channel. All citizens have to be tested on the 2nd day and the 12th day upon arrival at Hong Kong. I would like to remind the public that for all citizens returning through the scheme via land-based crossings, whether they are from the Guangdong province, Macau, or other mainland provinces, they have to get a negative test result from a testing institution recognized by the authorities. This is different with the arrangements for those returning by the airport. In the Guangdong province, there are 54 recognized institutions. In Macau, there are 4. If your test results is generated by a medical institution other than those listed in the list, you will not fulfill the conditions for exemption from quarantine. That's why Hong Kong residents returning from places outside Guangdong province via land-based crossing have to allow for enough time to get a test from a recognized institution. The details I have said just now can be found on our website, returntohongkong.gov.hk, or through the hotline 3142-2330 or our mainland offices. I would like to remind citizens who plan to return to Hong Kong via this scheme, if you want to return to the mainland or Macau later, then unless you are further exempted from quarantine, you have to be subject to a 14-day quarantine when you go back to the mainland or Macau. And also, the Hong Kong SAR government is planning to allow other people to come to Hong Kong without being subject to 14-day quarantine from the Guangdong province or Macau in mid-May to resume traveling between the 3 places. The relevant authorities are actively coordinating and preparing for the plan. The HKSAR government is working towards full resumption of travel of people across the borders. However, we have to control the epidemic, and also Hong Kong people should get vaccinated to protect themselves and their friends so that we can walk out of the epidemic and resume travel.
Now is question and answer session. Before you ask questions, please identify your organization and keep your questions to under 3. The reporter in white. I'm from Now TV. Question 4, Mr. Yao. Well, for Singaporeans coming to Hong Kong, there is no need for them to get vaccinated. However, Hong Kong people going to Singapore will have to finish the 2 doses of vaccination. Why? Well, does it mean that Singaporeans coming to Hong Kong and they don't have to get vaccinated and they don't have to go through quarantine? Isn't it a loophole? And how effective do you think the air travel bubble is? There are numerous restrictions. It may dampen the enthusiasm of travelers and travel agencies to join. And if there is the circuit breaker mechanism, and if it is kicked in, then what about people who are stranded? Well, would there be a circuit breaker system for under the Return to Hong Kong scheme? Because the situation may change any time. There may be an outbreak. And if there is the circuit breaker for Return to Hong Kong scheme, what are the details? The bilateral arrangement is based on sufficient health safeguard. Last year, when we started the discussion until this day, governments of 2 places have been giving inputs. There are testings at the time of departure and arrival, as well as designated flight. That itself is a safeguard. In relation to vaccination, well, the most important objective is to protect yourself. When you're vaccinated, then you are protected wherever you go. So, under the relaunch of the scheme, you will have to fulfill the testing arrangements, travel on designated flights, and fulfill additional requirements. As I said, we have the condition to enable citizens to get vaccinated, and to protect public health, we put in place this additional requirement. You can only travel after you have received 2 doses of vaccination. For the Singapore side, they will decide, taking into account their situation. But our proposal has been accepted by the Singaporean government as well. You ask about the effectiveness and the take-up rate. We want to resume cross-border air travel in a gradual and orderly manner. Back in November, we have reached a consensus, but there was a sudden change of situation. The scheme was put on hold. And if there is no relevant measures in place, and if there is a change in situation, we have to stop the scheme, and it will cause a lot of inconvenience. So of the 4 areas of additional arrangements, we want to make sure that not only will the epidemic situation be stabilized, but also that we have added 3 consecutive days. When we have changed the number of confirmed cases from 5 to 3 for the 3 additional consecutive days to make sure that the epidemic situation is stabilized and going downward. No safeguard. On top of that, when Hong Kong people have been vaccinated before they travel, then everyone will feel safe when they travel. So we want to make sure that it is done in an orderly manner, and it will also give peace of mind to everyone. We will follow this line when approaching different other places. This time round, it is Singapore. There may be other places in the future, and we have to make sure that we will start when both sides are happy with the situation. The Return to Hong Kong scheme itself is a one-way scheme. Under the scheme, Hong Kong residents on the mainland are allowed to come back to Hong Kong without going through the 14-day compulsory quarantine. The epidemic situation on the mainland has been under control for quite some time. Under Cap 599C, compulsory quarantine of certain persons arriving at Hong Kong from the mainland, the arrangement has been in place for quite some time and has been implementing quite smoothly. There is one condition under the specified conditions. Hong Kong residents coming from the mainland back to Hong Kong, for 14 days before departure, they are not allowed to have been to other places outside China or Hong Kong, or medium or high-risk places on the mainland. The National Health Commission has been making arrangements to classify places as a medium or high-risk. Those who are traveling back under the scheme will be people who have not been to these medium risk or high risk places. I'm from Hong Kong Economic Times. First, I'd like to ask about the air travel bubble. In relation to vaccination, well, there are 4 groups of people that can be exempted before departure. But what about people who cannot get vaccinated for health reasons? What kind of certificate or proof do they need to produce? Do they go to see a private doctor? Or they will have to be one of the 4 categories and not anyone outside those 4 categories? In terms of airline companies, will flights be limited to Cathay Pacific and Singaporean Airlines? In terms of the nucleic acid test, they will have to be paid for by travelers. And it's been half a year since the last time when it was proposed. Has there been any changes in testing fees and the number of recognized testing laboratories? And I'd like to ask about the extended scope under the Return to Hong Kong scheme, where there is the addition of the Hong Kong airport with 1,000 places under the quota system. How long would they stay at 1,000 before the number is increased? Well, you ask about the arrangements between Hong Kong and Singapore. First, exemption from vaccination. We follow the Singaporean requirement. Well, unless you are under the age of 16, you can get vaccinated. So basically, it covers majority of the population. If for health reasons or if you're under the age of 16, you cannot get vaccinated, of course, you can get exempted. But you have to provide doctor's certificate. But we must emphasize that this is to protect yourself. When you travel, you may be exposed to higher risk than staying in Hong Kong. So we ask people to get vaccinated to get additional protection. But if for some reasons they cannot get vaccinated, then we think it is reasonable.
Concerning arrangements about air companies, when the scheme is rolled out in May, the 2 air companies, that is the Cathay Pacific and the Singapore airline, will provide 1 flight with 200 seats in the first week, and then in the second week, the number will be increased. Well, when the scheme is up and running, other air companies will be included as well. So that will be a gradual increase. Concerning the on their own, Hong Kong residents can get a test from private doctors or local testing centers. The fee is $240. For figure, it seems that the testing fee is below 200 Singaporean dollars. So it is some 1,000 Hong Kong dollars equivalent. Concerning the return to Hong Kong scheme, after its extension, Hong Kong residents in mainland cities outside Guangdong province and Macau can return to Hong Kong via the Hong Kong International Airport. At the airport, they will have to undergo tests and hold. They will have to undergo a test at the airport and wait for a negative test results before allowing to enter Hong Kong. So in determining the number of quota places, we have considered the need. However, we can only be sure of the need or the demand after the scheme is implemented. For example, for Stringent Bay, we are providing 3,000 quota places. For the Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, we are providing 2,000 quota places. The quota is not fully utilized, so we have to wait and see for the international airport. There will be test and hold in the airport. We have to consider the testing capacity at the airport. We don't want the airport to be overcrowded when flights touch down. And also we have to handle the travelers in the bubble separately. So we will review the actual situation and consider increasing the quota in future. However, for a start, we think 1,000 is a good place to start. Next question, let's take an English question.
Mr. Yao from RTHK. Do you think it is not really fair for that when our people travel to Singapore, they have to be fully vaccinated and there isn't such a requirement for Singaporeans coming to Hong Kong? Did the government ask, why didn't the government ask for the same arrangement for Singaporeans coming to Hong Kong? Question two, when you discuss the travel bubble plan with other countries, will in addition to what you have just outlined to us just now, and what is the progress of having other travel bubbles with other countries? Can we expect any new travel bubble soon? And also, Mr. Nick, about the return to Hong Kong scheme, is there any progress in terms of reducing the quarantine period for Hong Kong people traveling to the mainland? If there isn't, what are the difficulties you are encountering? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may answer the first two questions. Now, first and foremost, the air travel bubble arrangement is premised on sufficient safeguard on people sort of joining the scheme. And in our discussion since last year and until now, the most important sort of a control element is resting with the double test for all the travelers, including pre-departure and upon arrival negative PCR results. So that is being maintained. In addition, we are also bubbling the flight, i.e. there will be dedicated flight with crew members also sort of subject to such scrutiny. So these basic requirement has fulfilled the advice by the Port Health by both sides to be essential features. But as I mentioned, that in the case of Hong Kong, we have made provisions for the entire community to be vaccinated so as to protect themselves. And the purpose of asking Hong Kong residents going out to have vaccination prior to joining the scheme is in fact protecting their own sort of health. Such requirement is premised on the ability for us to vaccinate them and also provide such choice. This would be the additional safeguard for our people. Of course, it will be up to the other government to whether they will require such arrangement. But the basic premise is for any vaccination, I think medical expert will advise you that, well, these are for essentially and foremost for self-protection. Your second question, that, well, we have all along been talking to a number of countries and economies on the possible resumption of travel in a more relaxed manner. Relaxed in the sense that, well, if sufficient safeguards are being provided, then they do not need to go through the very lengthy quarantine period. We we hope that, well, the Hong Kong-Singapore arrangement, if succeed, could also be the basis for us to talk to other economies or countries where we feel comfortable and agreeable for both sides. Now, of course, this will be something we need to look at on a bilateral basis, whether we consider the other sort of partner having a very stable and safe situation. Since we started this conversation and dialogue middle of last year, we have been keeping in touch with a number of economies, updating them the progress. For instance, immediately after the agreement of Singapore, I'm going to let some other partners, for instance, New Zealand, Australia, know that, well, we have this arrangement, and we can use that as a basis for further discussion with them. And subject to sort of bilateral consensus, I think, well, this process can be carried on.
Actually, your question is not relating to the return to Hong Kong travel scheme, but Hong Kong people entering the mainland, whether they could be exempt from the quarantine requirements. We have been in discussions with the mainland authorities. Of course, this is our target and also our direction. And I'm sure that everyone in Hong Kong would like to see early opening up of the travel between mainland and Hong Kong. But to enable us to do so, it's very important that the epidemic situation in Hong Kong is under control. That could be judged by the number of confirmed cases. We must achieve near zero or sustain very low number of confirmed cases, and very importantly, no unlinked cases. I think these are the indications showing the epidemic situation is really under control. Second point is about the risk level in Hong Kong. Of course, with a high rate of vaccination, the whole community would receive a stronger protection, and the risk of having a large-scale outbreak, should there be any virus spread in the community, would be greatly reduced. So a high vaccination rate would, of course, would be very helpful to reducing the overall risk level of Hong Kong. So in the eyes of the mainland authorities, I'm sure that they would look at Hong Kong, whether Hong Kong is, in their classification, still a high-risk area or medium-risk area. As long as we are still in the medium or high-risk area, I'm sure that we would far from achieving that. So that's the area that we have to work very hard, to really put our epidemic situation under control, to reduce our number of confirmed cases to zero or near zero, and get rid of all the unlinked cases, and also achieve a high level of vaccination rate. I think these are the things that the priority areas that we must work hard.
Next question, please. The lady in green.
Morning Post. Secretary, is this compulsory vaccination requirement actually also intended to boost Hong Kong's vaccination drive, especially now the vaccination rate is still relatively low? And also, will there be any other measure to facilitate the operation of tour groups regarding this travel bubble? Thank you.
I think I've answered the first question twice. The purpose of asking Hong Kong residents when they go out to join the scheme and enjoy quarantine-free arrangement is to have their own protection through vaccination. As we all know that, well, having vaccinated, you've got a higher protection for your own self. And therefore, we consider this as something that we should do and also capable of doing because of the availability of vaccination in Hong Kong, not to mention the choice they can have. As regards to your second question, I think, of course, a tour group can take advantage of this arrangement, but individual travel could also. So I think once we have established this arrangement, And with airlines reintroducing the flights, I think travel agents would be free to plan ahead. And that is in fact part of the reason why we need to sort of make the announcement a month ahead, so that, well, people can start planning. Not to mention that, well, people, if they need to fulfill the requirement, they may still need to do the test and also complete the vaccination procedures. And I believe that, well, this would also send a very good signal to people among the two cities that, well, things are moving steadily, and so that we can sort of start planning for trips, be they business or family reunion or taking a break for holiday. Having said that, most important is also all the precaution, and that's why we have make provision for additional safeguards to make sure that, well, this arrangement would not only provide the sufficient safeguard, but also ensure a more steady sort of development in the time to come. Thank you.
右手邊第三行黑色衫嗰位女士。
The lady on the right, I'm from TVB. I'd like to ask about the vaccination situation. That is in relation to the air travel bubble. For those leaving Hong Kong, if they are required to get vaccinated, but Singaporean coming to Hong Kong don't have to get vaccinated, does it mean that Hong Kong authorities are requiring people in Hong Kong to get vaccinated? Does it mean that they don't have to, they won't be checked in Singapore, or is that a specified type of vaccine that they accept? And are you in discussion with any other places in relation to other travel bubbles? As I said, that vaccination is a requirement for people, for Hong Kong residents leaving Hong Kong under the air travel bubble. It is to protect themselves. As to the type, well, the both types available in Hong Kong give you protection. So when the requirements under the arrangements are fulfilled, then they can join this scheme. Your second question, what about other countries? I've said previously, starting from the middle of last year, there are about 10 countries that are in discussion or in contact with us. To be more specific, at this point of time, the places that we will move on for discussion will include New Zealand and Australia. They are the first ones because I understand that they have a similar arrangement in place, put on hold for the time being because of a change in situation. But we think that Australia and New Zealand can be our starting point. We keep monitoring other places that Hong Kong people are interested in going. But the premise is that we have to take into account the situation, the epidemic situation of these places and relevant requirements. We will discuss with the Consulate General of these places. We will continue our discussions with them. The one in green on the right, I'm from RTHK. First, experts talked about the mutated strain and that they might reduce the level of protection of the vaccination. Given that, is it still suitable to relaunch the air travel bubble? And I'd like to ask about return to Hong Kong scheme. The Secretary said that mainland is rather safe. Has the government considered under what circumstance will the return to Hong Kong scheme be halted? Has Hong Kong been speaking to and the mainland about relaxation of requirements for Hong Kong people to go to China and Macau? We will have to feel safe. Everyone will have to feel safe with the epidemic situation before we can relaunch anything. We've been fighting the epidemic for over a year. Economic activities, our daily lives, not just traveling, will have to resume. So we have to first put in place a mechanism, using Singapore as an example. The epidemic situation in both places have stabilized to our satisfaction. Since March, the situation in Hong Kong has been stabilizing. The 7-day moving average is under 5 in terms of number of confirmed cases per day. You talk about the evolving situation, say for example, mutated strain. That's why we have put in additional conditions under the arrangement with Singapore. We'll see if travelers have been to other places than Singapore and Hong Kong, and if they have, then they will have to complete the quarantine period at their respective place before they start counting the 14 days. This is to avoid the case of a longer incubation period of prospective travelers. We will monitor the unrelated cases over 4 days. We've added 3 days, and we have adopted a lower threshold of number of cases. This is to ensure that the epidemic situation is not just under control and that it is moving downward. On top of that, we have the requirement to use apps. We have the Leave Home Safe app, and they have the Trace Together app. This will be conducive to contact tracing. On top of that, there is the requirement of vaccination. It shows that we have taken into account the evolving situation. In the coming weeks, if there is any change in the epidemic situation of both places, we will have further discussion and make adjustments under the arrangement. We will respond to the changing situation, and we want to that the scheme will not stop and start. Regarding return to Hong Kong scheme, you talk about mutated strain and the relationship with vaccination. Let me say this. Mutated strains are more transmissible than the original counterpart. But still, vaccines will give you protection. And when you have been vaccinated, it will reduce the risk of fatality and serious condition. That's why we need to get vaccinated as soon as possible with different types of mutated strain. And if the mutated strain is in our community, we will against the mutated strains transmission if there are more people vaccinated. It's not the case that because there is the mutated strain, you should not get vaccinated. You should get vaccinated exactly because of the mutated strain. In relation to the epidemic situation on the mainland, well, that situation has been under control for quite some time. Well, for those returning to Hong Kong, they are not allowed to have visited places that are designated as medium risk or high risk. At various places, the National Health Commission will classify these places as medium or high risk. people who have been to these medium risk or high risk places, they not be eligible under the return to Hong Kong scheme without 14-day quarantine.
Thirdly, the return to Hong Kong scheme is a one-way scheme. That is to exempt Hong Kong residents of the 14-day compulsory quarantine requirements upon returning to Hong Kong from to enjoy quarantine-free travel to the mainland. However, to achieve that, first we have to make sure that our epidemic situation is under control. The indicator is the number of our confirmed cases. It should be 0 or close to 0, especially for unlinked cases. When we have identifiable origin, that means that we have a risk of community outbreak. And also, if the vaccination rate is high, even though virus can infiltrate a major outbreak, in the perspective of the mainland authorities, we are still a medium to high risk place. If that's the case, then it is very difficult for Hong Kong residents to be exempted from compulsory quarantine requirements. Traveling to the mainland, keep the situation under control, and also we have to increase the vaccination rate. And thirdly, we will continue negotiation with the mainland authorities. If the situation is under control and if the vaccination rate is high, then there may be room for relaxing quarantine requirements. We will take 2 more questions. The lady on the right-hand side. Hi, I'm from Oriental Daily. Concerning vaccination of travelers, if they like to travel on the 26th of May, should they get the first dose today? If because of their condition they are not suitable for getting vaccinated, are there alternatives for them? And also, Singaporean travelers will not be required to be vaccinated to come to Hong Kong. Allow voluntary vaccination of travelers. Why isn't the Hong Kong SAR government requiring Singaporean travelers to be vaccinated before coming to Hong Kong? But Hong Kong people need to be vaccinated before going to Singapore. And also, residents are going to the Singapore, they have to download the Trace Together app. However, in Hong Kong, Singaporean travelers can still fill in the forms. So would there be difficulties in tracing? And also, if the 7-day moving number of confirmed cases is higher than 5 for 3 consecutive days, the scheme will be suspended. So how can we monitor the situation? And also concerning return to Hong Kong scheme for land-based crossing, no testing is needed. But why do we need this for the Hong Kong International Airport? Professor Chen said she is the government is trying to facilitate those who have received 2 doses of vaccination to go to the mainland quarantine-free. So what is the progress? The air travel bubble arrangement is based on the testing before departure and upon arrival, and also there will be designated flights. These are the basic safeguards. On the other hand, vaccination is mainly for protecting oneself. So we are requiring Hong Kong residents to be vaccinated so as to protect themselves before traveling. So this is the basis that I have been talking about. On installing the Leave Home Safe app, in Hong Kong, most So it should not be too difficult to implement this condition. On the other hand, when Hong Kong travelers arrive at Singapore, they have to download the Trace Together app. The requirements are similar, so I don't think that there would be major difficulties. Concerning the number of confirmed cases, of course, we are concerned that if these imported cases have walked into the community, then it would be varying. The daily number of imported cases reported are discovered during test and hold in the airport or during quarantine in Hong Kong. So so the patients have not entered the community yet. So these safeguards work. For local untraceable cases, those are more worrying because we don't know what the origins are. Maybe they are contracted locally or maybe they are imported. So both governments agree to adopt the same standards, that is 5 cases for 3 consecutive days according to the 7-day moving number. However, this time we have an additional safeguard. We require the case numbers to be less than 3. So we want to make sure that there is a downward trend. Concerning testing for return to Hong Kong scheme, for arrivals at international airport, firstly, before departure from a mainland city, get a negative test result from a recognized institution. Secondly, upon arrival at the Hong Kong International Airport, there will be a designated place for them to be tested. And they would only be allowed to enter Hong Kong if the test results are negative. After entering on the so for Hong Kong residents returning to Hong Kong via Hong Kong International Airport from the mainland, there will be a test at the airport and there will be a test on the 12th day. So there will be 2 tests. For those arriving at Hong Kong via land-based crossing, and the test must be done by an institution recognized by the Guangdong province or the mainland authorities. So for Hong Kong residents returning to Hong Kong via land crossing, they have to get a test in Guangdong and then enter Hong Kong via land-based crossing or the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. Starting 1st of April, they have to be tested on the 2nd day as well as the 12th day. So same goes for those who arrive at Hong Kong via land-based crossing. There will be 2 tests. Concerning the quarantine arrangements for Hong Kong residents traveling to the mainland, I have answered this question just now. We have been negotiating with the mainland authorities concerning resumption of travel. The main conditions are that epidemic situation has to be under control and also our risk has to be considered low, and also we have to have a higher vaccination rate. And also, we are working with the mainland authorities to see whether the quarantine period can be adjusted if someone is vaccinated. So the premises are that we have to control the epidemic and stabilize the situation. The last question, please. Sorry, the speaker is not coming through the mic. The last question, please. The lady on the left-hand side.
Just now, secretaries have introduced the relaunch of the air travel bubble. Apart from the epidemic measures, What special features or highlights are there with these designated flights? Just now, you've said that there will be discussions with other places to launch air travel bubble. Apart from this, in relation to business activities, what are your plans? The third question is in relation to return to Hong Kong scheme. Just now, the Secretary said that there will be an expansion of the scope. What about Greater Bay Area development? What planning the Hong Kong government have? I will try to answer the first and your second question. In relation to designated flights, it means that it is a dedicated flight to operate between the two places, i.e. Hong Kong and Singapore. There is no transit arrangement. In relation to the cabin crew of these designated flights, within 3 days they have to get tested, and they would not work in other flights. Say, usually the cabin crew will work in other flights, going to other places before working on other flights, but that will not be the case for the designated flights. They will only serve the designated flights. That is one of the safeguards in place to protect travelers under the air travel bubble. In relation to the arrangement between Hong Kong and Singapore, it will serve as a basis and an example for us to start discussion with other places. There may be different requirements with other places. However, in terms of safeguards, say protection to travelers, that will serve as a common ground in the discussion with other places. We need everything to be in place before we can start a discussion, and we will talk to other places. As I've said, for places in which the epidemic situation is stabilized, say New Zealand, we will make arrangements to talk to them. We will also cite our arrangement with Singapore and as an example. The Singapore air travel bubble is the first step to resume cross-border travel in an orderly manner. We hope that with other places, including the mainland, when the epidemic situation is under control, we will be able to work on resuming travel, cross-boundary travel. It's not limited to just travel. It may be some other economic activities. We hope that they will resume in an orderly and gradual manner. In relation to the return to Hong Kong scheme, the Greater Bay Area development under the outline plan, development plan, we have been working to take that forward, because the Greater Bay Area is very important to people's livelihood and the economy. One of the conditions to the Greater Bay Area is the resumption of travel, the border, and we have to do it in a gradual and orderly manner. We've already started the first step. Under the Return to Hong Kong scheme, Hong Kong residents may come back to Hong Kong without the compulsory quarantine period. Now we have expanded the scope to provinces outside Guangdong and Macau. If they fulfill certain requirements, they don't have to go through the compulsory quarantine period. We hope that the quarantine period for Hong Kong residents traveling to China will be shortened or at some point be exempted. We have to wait for the Hong Kong epidemic situation to be under control, for the number of cases to be close to unlinked cases before we can do that. And we need vaccination because that is a very important condition to resumption of the activities. Overall speaking, we have to try to resume cross-boundary travel in order to kickstart other activities. Well, let me reiterate and respond to the question asked by the reporter. Basically, under our arrangement with Singapore and in terms of quarantine, the requirements are to the satisfaction of both sides. Our requirement for vaccination is to protect Hong Kong's residents. It's not a requirement we required of others, is to protect Hong Kong people. Well, other provinces, does it include Taiwan?